The Galactic Arbitration Council chamber buzzed with the usual mix of translated voices, each species adding their own unique frequency to the cacophony. Commander Sarah Chen stood at the entrance, her worn leather holster visible beneath her diplomatic jacket. She had been summoned to present humanity's case for inclusion in the Galactic Defense Network, and she knew the deck was stacked against her. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, a massive sphere where delegates from 200 worlds floated in their preferred atmospheres, each in custom-designed observation pods. At the center, a holographic platform displayed whoever held the floor. Sarah stepped onto the transport disk that would carry her to that very spot. As she rose toward the center, she caught sight of the Velcrin delegation. They were insectoid beings, their chitinous armor gleaming under the chamber's artificial light. Their military prowess was legendary across the galaxy. Next to them floated the Korthax, beings of pure energy contained in crystalline shells. They had mastered weapons that could disrupt molecular bonds from orbit. And there, in the upper quadrant, the Zenithar observed with their multiple sensory organs, a species so advanced they had colonized 3 galaxies. Sarah's platform locked into place at the center of the sphere. A Velcrin delegate, Ambassador Threxcall, activated his translation matrix. His voice came through as a series of clicks and whistles, but the neural implant in Sarah's ear converted it to perfect English. The human wishes to address the Council regarding defensive capabilities. We have reviewed the preliminary data. Threxcall's mandibles clicked in what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of dismissive laughter. The presentation may proceed, though we anticipate this will be brief. Sarah straightened her shoulders. She had faced down corporate raiders in the asteroid belt and survived first contact with a hostile alien probe. She could handle some bureaucratic condescension. Honored delegates, humanity requests admission to the Galactic Defense Network. We understand that admission requires demonstration of viable defensive technology that can contribute to collective security. Sarah's voice remained steady, projecting confidence she didn't entirely feel. A hologram appeared beside her, showing Earth's defensive installations, the fleet of faster-than-light capable ships humanity had built, and the various energy weapons they had reverse-engineered from the limited galactic technology they'd been allowed to purchase. Your energy weapons are 3 generations behind current standards, a Korthax delegate observed, their voice resonating like a chorus of bells. Your ships, while numerous, lack the shielding to survive engagement with any modern military force. What exactly do you bring to the network that justifies the resources required to integrate your species? Sarah had expected this. She pressed a button on her wrist console, and the hologram changed. It now showed humanity's manufacturing capacity, the raw determination that had taken them from wooden ships to starships in mere centuries, the adaptability that had allowed them to colonize their entire solar system. We bring innovation, adaptability, and a willingness to stand with our allies, Sarah said. We may not have the most advanced technology, but we have something equally valuable. Sentiment? Threxcall interrupted. Emotions and determination do not stop plasma torpedoes, Commander. They do not generate defensive shields. The network requires practical contributions, not philosophical ones. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. She had known this would be difficult, but the casual dismissal stung more than she wanted to admit. Perhaps a demonstration would be more appropriate, suggested a Zenithar delegate, their words coming through the translator with an almost musical quality. The humans claim adaptability and innovation. Let them demonstrate their defensive capabilities in a practical scenario. Sarah's heart sank. A practical demonstration meant combat simulation, and humanity's technology was woefully outmatched in that arena. But refusing would end any chance of admission to the network. What did you have in mind? Sarah asked carefully. A simple exercise, the Zenithar continued. You will face a standard pirate raid scenario in our simulation chamber. Defend a civilian transport using whatever methods you deem appropriate. We will provide you with a standard network defensive platform. If you can successfully repel the simulated attack, we will reconsider your application. It was a trap, of course. The simulation would be calibrated to network standard responses. Human reflexes, human tactics, and human weapons would all be operating in an environment designed for species with different capabilities. I accept, Sarah said, knowing she had no choice. However, I request permission to use human equipment as well as the network platform. If you're evaluating our defensive contributions, you should see what we actually bring to the table. Threxcall's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound Sarah's implant didn't translate, though the meaning was clear enough. You wish to use primitive human technology in addition to advanced network systems? Very well. It will make the demonstration that much more instructive. The chamber's lighting shifted as the central platform transformed into a transport disk. Sarah was carried to the simulation deck, a massive room 3 levels below the main chamber. Several dozen delegates had chosen to observe in person, their environmental pods following her down. The simulation deck was empty except for a control console and what appeared to be a standard defensive turret setup. Sarah walked to the console and began reviewing the scenario parameters. A civilian transport carrying 5,000 refugees under attack by 3 pirate corvettes armed with plasma cannons and missile pods. The transport had minimal shields and no weapons. Her job was to hold off the pirates until network security could arrive, approximately 8 minutes into the simulation. 8 minutes, a lifetime in combat. Sarah examined the defensive turret. It was a plasma repeater, capable of firing coherent energy bursts at near-light speed. Effective, powerful, and completely unfamiliar to human operators. She had trained on simulators, but this was different. This was real network hardware, with a response time measured in microseconds, designed for species with neural processing speeds faster than human baseline. She turned to her equipment bag, the one she had brought from her ship. Inside was something that had made the security scanners alarm when she first arrived at the council station. The guards had laughed when they saw it, once they realized it wasn't actually a threat to station integrity. Sarah pulled out the M1 Garand rifle, its wooden stock worn smooth by decades of use and careful maintenance. It had belonged to her great-grandfather, carried through a war on Earth before humans ever dreamed of touching the stars. The metal still gleamed, each part lovingly maintained by 3 generations of Chen family members who had served in various military forces. In the observation gallery, she heard the unmistakable sound of laughter. Her implant picked up fragments of translated conversation. Is that a chemical projectile weapon? Primitive doesn't begin to describe it. I believe their species used such devices before they even achieved nuclear fusion. And she thinks this museum piece will aid in the simulation? Perhaps humans also bring comedy to the network. Sarah ignored them. She checked the rifle's action, smooth as silk despite its age. She loaded an en-bloc clip, 8 rounds of .30-06 ammunition that she had manufactured herself in her ship's machine shop. Then she approached the control console and initialized the simulation. The room transformed. Holographic projectors created a perfect illusion of open space. The civilian transport appeared as a massive vessel, its hull scarred and patched, running lights flickering as damaged power systems struggled to maintain life support. Sarah could see faces through the viewports, families huddled together, terrified. The 3 pirate corvettes approached in a standard harassment pattern, spreading out to attack from multiple vectors. Sarah's hands moved across the console, bringing the plasma repeater online. The targeting system activated, but the interface was designed for Velcrin operators. Controls that should have been intuitive felt clumsy and slow under human fingers. The first pirate vessel opened fire. Plasma bolts lanced across the simulated space, slamming into the transport's failing shields. Sarah triggered the defensive turret, but her shot went wide. The targeting reticle moved too fast, overcorrecting for her input. She was used to human systems, designed around human reaction times and human neural architecture. Another volley from the pirates. The transport's shields flickered, down to 40% capacity. Sarah could see the panic on the simulated faces, and even knowing they were holograms, she felt the weight of responsibility. Real people were counting on humanity to prove itself worthy of joining the galactic community. She fired the plasma repeater again, this time leading her target by what felt like an impossible margin. The bolt caught the pirate corvette's shield, draining some of its defensive capacity, but doing no real damage. In return, all three pirates opened up, plasma and missiles creating a devastating crossfire. Sarah's hands blurred across the console, routing power to different shield sections, trying to keep the transport protected, but she was fighting a losing battle. The network systems were powerful, but she lacked the training and neural speed to use them effectively. The transport's shields dropped to 20%, then 15%, then 10%. The transport would be destroyed in approximately 90 seconds, the simulation timer told her. Network reinforcements were still 6 minutes away. She had failed. In the observation gallery, she could almost feel the satisfied judgment. The humans had been tested and found wanting, just as everyone had predicted. They would return to their little corner of space, unworthy of joining the greater galactic community. Sarah stepped back from the console. The plasma repeater continued its automated defensive pattern, but without skilled guidance, it was nearly useless. The pirate ships pressed their advantage, moving in for the kill. She raised the M1 Garand to her shoulder, feeling the familiar weight, the way it settled against her body like an extension of herself. Through the rifle's iron sights, she found her first target. The lead pirate corvette, its shields visibly flickering as they cycled through recharge patterns. In the observation gallery, the laughter had stopped. The delegates watched in confused silence as the human commander aimed what they considered an antique at a holographic spaceship. Sarah breathed out slowly, squeezed the trigger, and felt the rifle's familiar kick against her shoulder. The mechanical action ejected the spent casing with a distinctive ping of metal on metal. The chemical propellant sent a 150-grain bullet downrange at 2,800 feet per second. In space combat, this would have been meaningless. The bullet would travel at a fixed velocity, with no way to adjust course, no guidance system, no explosive warhead. Against shields and armor designed to stop plasma bolts that traveled at near-light speed, a simple projectile should have been nothing more than a curiosity. Should have been. The simulation's holographic projectors faithfully reproduced the bullet's trajectory. It struck the pirate corvette's shield matrix at the exact microsecond when the shield was cycling from one emitter node to another. For a fraction of a second, measured in time frames too small for most species to even perceive, there was a gap in the coverage. The bullet passed through. The observation gallery fell absolutely silent as the simulation registered the impact. The bullet struck the corvette's shield generator housing, a component never designed to withstand kinetic impacts because modern shields stopped such attacks thousands of meters before they could reach the hull. The physical projectile tore through delicate circuitry, and suddenly the pirate ship's entire defensive grid collapsed. Sarah was already working the bolt, chambering the next round. The rifle's mechanical action was smooth, reliable, requiring no power source beyond her own muscles. She found her second target, the pirate ship attempting to flank from above the transport. This one had its shields at full power, cycling through defensive harmonics designed to dissipate energy weapons. She squeezed the trigger again. The bullet flew true, striking the shield at a different point, different timing. This shield held, the projectile deflecting harmlessly into space. But Sarah had expected that. She fired again and again, each shot forcing the shield generators to compensate, to route power to physical barrier protocols that were normally afterthoughts in modern combat. The third shot found another gap. This bullet struck the corvette's sensor array, a cluster of delicate instruments mounted on an external pylon. Plasma bolts would have been deflected by the shields long before reaching such vulnerable points. But physical projectiles, moving at velocities considered glacial by galactic standards, simply weren't prioritized by automated defense systems. The pirate ship's targeting capability dropped by 30%. Its next volley of plasma bolts went wide, missing the transport entirely. Ambassador Threxcall leaned forward in his observation pod, his mandibles still. His compound eyes tracked the trajectory of each bullet, analyzing what he was seeing. It made no sense according to conventional tactical doctrine. The human was using a weapon that should have been completely ineffective, yet somehow she was achieving results that the advanced network defensive systems had failed to accomplish. Sarah's rifle clicked empty. The en-bloc clip ejected with that distinctive metallic ping that had become legendary in Earth's military history. She reloaded smoothly, muscle memory guiding her hands through movements practiced thousands of times. 8 more rounds. The first pirate corvette, its shields offline, had fallen back to a safer distance. The captain was clearly re-evaluating the threat level. Whatever intelligence they had gathered on human capabilities hadn't mentioned weapons like this. The second corvette, with damaged sensors, was attempting to recalibrate its targeting systems. The third pirate ship, untouched so far, accelerated forward. Its captain had decided to press the advantage while the human was reloading. Plasma cannons charged, missile pods opened. This would be a full alpha strike, enough firepower to overwhelm the transport's failing shields and crack the hull like an egg. Sarah brought the rifle up again, but this time she didn't aim at the attacking ship. Instead, she targeted one of the missiles in mid-flight. The warhead was heavily shielded, designed to survive point defense fire, but those shields were optimized against energy weapons. She fired. The bullet struck the missile's shield and deflected, but the impact was enough to throw off the guidance system by a fraction of a degree. The missile veered off course, missing the transport by 20 meters. She fired again, striking a second missile. This one's shield was cycling at the moment of impact, and the bullet punched through, striking the warhead's detonator. The missile exploded prematurely, and its neighboring ordnance detonated in sympathy. A chain reaction rippled through the pirates' missile volley, turning their attack into a scattered fireworks display that posed no threat to the transport. In the observation gallery, a Zenithar delegate activated their communication matrix. Impossible. Chemical projectiles cannot be effective against modern defensive systems. The mathematics do not support what we are observing. But a Korthax observer, their crystalline structure pulsing with thought, had begun to understand. The human is not trying to overpower the defenses. She is exploiting the fact that our defensive systems are not calibrated for such primitive attacks. The shields cycle through frequencies designed to counter energy weapons, particle beams, and plasma. A physical projectile moving at sublight speed occupies a different threat category entirely. A category so obsolete that modern systems treat it as negligible, another delegate added, their tone carrying what the translator rendered as reluctant admiration. Sarah had no time to appreciate their dawning understanding. The simulation timer showed 4 minutes until reinforcements arrived. The transport's shields were at 8% and falling. The pirates, now wary but still dangerous, were regrouping for another attack. She turned her attention back to the plasma repeater console. The network weapon had continued its automated firing pattern, but without skilled guidance, it was achieving minimal results. Sarah studied the control interface again, and this time she approached it differently. She had been trying to operate it like a human weapon, but that was the wrong approach. Instead, she began programming firing solutions manually, treating the plasma repeater like an artillery piece rather than a point defense weapon. She calculated trajectories, predicted enemy movement patterns, and pre-programmed firing sequences. It was slower than real-time targeting, but it worked within her human limitations. The plasma repeater spat a burst of coherent energy following the solution Sarah had calculated. The bolt caught the first pirate corvette's stern, right where Sarah had predicted they would turn to avoid her previous fire. The ship's rear shields, already weakened, buckled under the impact. Atmosphere vented from a ruptured coolant line. Sarah worked the rifle's bolt again. 5 rounds remaining. The second pirate corvette, having finally recalibrated its sensors, opened fire on her defensive position. Plasma bolts slammed into the platform's shields, and Sarah felt the deck shudder beneath her feet. The simulation was programmed to be fully immersive. She fired at the attacking ship, aiming not for critical systems, but for psychological impact. The bullet struck the corvette's main viewport, spalling against the reinforced material, but creating a spiderweb crack across the transparency. Pirate captain or not, whoever was flying that ship now had a clear reminder that this human had weapons that could reach them personally. The corvette's attack pattern faltered, just for a moment, just long enough for Sarah to input another firing solution into the plasma repeater. The network weapon spoke again, and this time its bolt found the corvette's main plasma conduit. The pirate ship's weapons went offline, sparks and gas venting from its damaged systems. 2 pirate ships disabled, 1 still fully operational. The third corvette's captain had finally adapted to the threat. Rather than close to effective range where Sarah's rifle could exploit shield gaps, the ship stayed back, lobbing plasma bolts from maximum distance. It was a smart tactical adjustment, and it was working. The transport's shields collapsed entirely, and the next hit would breach the hull. Sarah had 4 rounds left. At this range, even if she could find a gap in the shields, the bullet would lose too much velocity to do meaningful damage. The plasma repeater could reach, but she needed 30 seconds to calculate a firing solution at this extreme range, and the transport didn't have 30 seconds. She made a decision that would have gotten her court-martialed under conventional military doctrine. Sarah aimed the rifle at the plasma repeater's power conduit, clearly visible on the exterior of the defensive turret. She fired, and the bullet severed the connection. The network weapon went dark, its considerable power draw suddenly eliminated. With the plasma repeater offline, the defensive platform's reactor had excess capacity. Sarah's hands flew across the console, rerouting all available power to the transport's shield generators. It was a desperate measure, using defensive platform power to protect the civilian ship rather than to attack the pirates. Network doctrine would never approve such a tactic. You defeated threats, not merely endured them. But Sarah wasn't trained in network doctrine. She was trained in human military tradition, where sometimes the mission was simply to keep people alive until help could arrive. The transport's shields flickered back to life, weak but present. The pirates' next plasma volley splashed harmlessly against the renewed defenses. Sarah could see the pirate captain's dilemma. They could continue the attack, eventually overwhelming the shields again, but reinforcements were now only 2 minutes away. Or they could cut their losses and escape while they still could. The pirate chose survival. All 3 corvettes, 2 damaged and 1 frustrated, turned and jumped to faster-than-light speeds, disappearing from the simulation. The civilian transport was safe. Simulated families wept with relief, holding each other close. The simulation ended. The holographic space dissolved, leaving Sarah standing on the deck with her great-grandfather's rifle and a disabled network defensive platform. The silence in the observation gallery was profound. Ambassador Threxcall was the first to speak, his mandibles moving slowly as he chose his words carefully. "Explain your tactics, Commander Chen. You disabled our advanced defensive weapon and relied instead on a chemical projectile launcher that predates your species' spaceflight capability. By all conventional military analysis, you should have failed catastrophically." Sarah safed the rifle and slung it over her shoulder. "With respect, Ambassador, I used every tool available to me. The plasma repeater is an excellent weapon, but I lack the training and neural processing speed to use it effectively in real-time combat. The rifle is something I know, something I understand completely. As for disabling the turret, sometimes the best defense isn't a bigger weapon. Sometimes it's just making sure the people you're protecting can survive until help arrives." A Korthax delegate's crystalline structure pulsed with rapid thought. "You exploited a fundamental vulnerability in modern military systems. Our weapons, our shields, our entire defensive philosophy is predicated on countering specific types of threats. Physical projectiles are considered obsolete beneath consideration. You turned our technological sophistication into a blind spot." "I used what I knew would work," Sarah corrected gently. "Every weapon system has vulnerabilities. In combat, you don't always need the most advanced technology. You need the right tool for the specific situation. Sometimes that's a plasma repeater. Sometimes it's an 80-year-old rifle." The Zenithar delegate who had proposed the test spoke, their multiple sensory organs all focused on Sarah. "Your performance was unconventional but effective. However, one successful simulation does not prove that humanity deserves inclusion in the Galactic Defense Network. It proves only that you possess a certain tactical creativity." "Then test me again," Sarah said immediately. "Different scenario, different parameters. I'll show you that what you saw wasn't luck or a one-time exploit. Humanity adapts. That's what we do. That's what we bring to the network." The delegates conferred among themselves for several minutes. Sarah stood at attention on the simulation deck, the rifle's weight familiar across her shoulders, while dozens of species debated humanity's fate in languages her translator could barely parse. Finally, Ambassador Threxcal spoke. "Very well, Commander Chen. We will conduct a second trial. However, this time the parameters will be more challenging. You will not face simple pirates. You will face a military strike force using network standard tactics and equipment. Furthermore, you will have no defensive platform. Only your personal equipment and whatever resources you can improvise from the scenario environment." Sarah felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her expression neutral. "Understood. What's the scenario?" A Velcrin tactical officer manipulated controls in their observation pod. "You are a security officer on a civilian station. A hostile boarding party has breached the hull and is advancing toward the civilian shelter where 300 refugees are located. Your objective is to delay the attackers for 10 minutes until station security can reach the shelter. You may not abandon the civilians. You may not seal them in the shelter, as life support is damaged and they will suffocate." It was a nightmare scenario, exactly the kind of desperate situation where superior firepower and numbers should decide the outcome. Sarah would be outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting in an environment designed to favor the attackers. "How many hostiles?" she asked. 12 soldiers, equipped with standard network combat armor and plasma rifles. The station environment will be randomized. You will have 60 seconds to familiarize yourself with the layout before the simulation begins." Sarah nodded. She checked her rifle again, then opened her equipment bag. Besides the M1 Garand and its ammunition, she had brought a few other items. A combat knife her grandmother had carried, a basic medical kit, a coil of rope, a multi-tool. Nothing that would seem impressive to species that could fabricate complex devices from raw energy. The simulation deck transformed again. This time, Sarah found herself in what appeared to be a mining station, all rough corridors and industrial equipment. The civilian shelter was at the end of a long corridor with several side passages and maintenance tunnels branching off. It was a defender's terrain if used correctly, but against 12 armored soldiers with energy weapons, it would quickly become a killing ground. Sarah moved quickly, using her 60 seconds to study the layout. She noted the locations of blast doors, emergency bulkheads, power conduits, and coolant lines. The station was old, its systems a patchwork of repairs and upgrades. Perfect. The civilians huddled in the shelter, their faces showing the same terror she had seen on the transport. These were holographic projections, but Sarah treated them as real. That was the only way to function in combat. You protected the people in front of you, not abstract concepts. Listen to me carefully, Sarah addressed the simulated civilians. I need you to stay exactly where you are. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, do not leave this shelter. Help is coming, but I need you to trust me and stay put. Can you do that? Heads nodded. A few children whimpered. An elderly male of some species Sarah didn't recognize stepped forward. We understand, soldier. We will wait. Please keep them away from our children. That's the plan, Sarah said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The 60-second timer expired. Somewhere in the station, 12 hostile soldiers began their advance toward the civilian shelter. Sarah took position in the main corridor, about 30 meters from the shelter entrance. She had disabled several lights, creating pools of shadow. She had used her rope to create tripwires connected to equipment she had repositioned. Not enough to stop armored soldiers, but enough to slow them down, to make them cautious. The first hostile appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving with the professional caution of a trained soldier. The combat armor was impressive, fully sealed environmental protection with integrated shields and sensor packages. The plasma rifle could fire sustained bursts that would reduce Sarah to constituent atoms in seconds. Sarah aimed carefully and fired. The bullet struck the soldier's helmet. The armor's shields, designed primarily for energy weapon defense, shunted the kinetic impact, but couldn't completely nullify it. The soldier staggered, momentarily stunned. Sarah worked the bolt and fired again, this time targeting the soldier's knee joint. Armor always had weak points where mobility required thinner protection. The bullet found the gap, and the soldier went down, not dead, but combat ineffective. 11 hostiles remaining. The enemy's tactical response was immediate and professional. Suppressing fire filled the corridor, plasma bolts turning the air luminous. Sarah had already moved, rolling into a side passage as the wall where she had been standing melted under the onslaught. She had 7 rounds left in this clip. 7 chances to thin the enemy numbers before she had to reload. And reloading under fire was a dangerous proposition, no matter how skilled you were. Sarah heard the distinctive sound of armored boots on metal decking. The hostiles were advancing in proper formation, covering each other's movements, checking corners. They were professionals, and they had adapted to the threat she posed. They would be watching for physical projectiles now, their shield protocols adjusted. But Sarah had been watching too. She had noticed something about the station's power conduits. They ran through the walls at regular intervals, carrying energy to various systems. And where there was energy, there were potential vulnerabilities. She aimed at a conduit junction box 10 meters ahead of the advancing soldiers and fired. The bullet punched through the protective casing and severed the main power line. Sparks erupted, and more importantly, the electromagnetic pulse from the damaged conduit disrupted the soldiers' shield harmonics for just a moment. In that moment, Sarah fired 3 more rounds in rapid succession. 1 missed, 2 found their marks, striking soldiers in their helmet optics and chest armor joints. Not kills, but mission kills. Soldiers with cracked faceplates and damaged armor seals had to fall back or risk exposure to the station's potentially toxic atmosphere. 9 hostiles remaining. 4 rounds left in her rifle. The enemy commander had clearly had enough of cautious advancement. The remaining soldiers charged, shields at maximum, laying down suppressing fire that turned the corridor into an inferno of superheated plasma. Sarah retreated toward the shelter, firing as she moved. Her bullets found 1 more target, striking a soldier's plasma rifle at just the right angle to crack the weapon's containment chamber. The resulting backblast took that soldier and a nearby squad mate out of the fight. 7 hostiles remaining, 1 round left. Sarah reached the shelter entrance and triggered the blast door, sealing herself in with the civilians. The door was thick, designed to contain hull breaches, but it wouldn't hold against sustained plasma fire. She had maybe 90 seconds before the hostiles cut through. The civilians watched her with terrified hope as she reloaded the rifle with her last clip. 8 more rounds, against 7 armored soldiers who were now very angry and very determined. "What happens now?" asked the elderly civilian who had spoken earlier. "Now we get creative," Sarah said. She examined the shelter's interior. It was a basic emergency refuge, with life support systems, emergency supplies, and industrial equipment stored for maintenance crews. Her eyes fell on a stack of compressed gas cylinders, oxygen, nitrogen, and various other gases used in station operations. Sarah worked quickly. She used her rope to secure several cylinders together, then positioned them near the blast door. She carefully opened the valves just slightly, creating a mixture of gases in that section of the shelter. Then she herded the civilians to the far end of the space. Behind emergency bulkheads, she manually sealed. The blast door was glowing red now, the hostiles cutting through with plasma torches. Sarah positioned herself at an angle where she could see the door but remained behind cover. She raised the rifle and waited. The door fell inward with a crash of superheated metal. The first hostile soldier stepped through, weapon raised, scanning for targets. Behind him, his squad mates prepared to flood into the shelter. Sarah fired once. Not at the soldiers, but at the gas cylinders she had positioned. The bullet struck a cylinder valve, and the resulting explosion was immediate and devastating. The mixture of gases, confined in that small space and ignited by the plasma-heated door, created a blast wave that threw the leading soldiers backward into their squad mates. The explosion was Sarah's smallest problem. The real danger was what happened next. The blast had ruptured multiple cylinders, and various gases were now mixing in unpredictable ways. Some were creating toxic combinations. Others were displacing oxygen. The soldiers' suits protected them, but their advance had become a chaotic scramble as they dealt with reduced visibility and uncertain footing. Sarah picked her shots carefully. One round to the helmet of a soldier struggling to rise. Another to the exposed knee of someone trying to drag a wounded squad mate to safety. A third to disable a plasma rifle being brought to bear on her position. 5 rounds remaining. 4 hostiles still combat effective. The enemy commander made the tactical decision Sarah had been hoping for. Faced with an unpredictable environmental hazard, an entrenched defender who had already inflicted significant casualties, and a mission clock that showed reinforcements arriving in 90 seconds, the commander ordered a retreat to a more defensible position. The hostiles pulled back, dragging their wounded, leaving the shelter entrance a smoking ruin. Sarah remained in cover, rifle ready, watching for any sign of a renewed assault. The civilians behind her were coughing from the gas fumes, but they were alive. The simulation timer reached 10 minutes. Station security forces appeared on the tactical display, sweeping through the station's corridors, securing the area. The remaining hostile soldiers were surrounded and forced to surrender without further resistance. The simulation ended. Sarah found herself once again standing on the simulation deck, her rifle still raised, adrenaline still flooding her system. In the observation gallery, not a single delegate was laughing now. Ambassador Threxicol descended from his pod to the deck level, something Sarah had never seen a Velcrin delegate do before. It was a sign of respect among his people to meet someone on equal ground rather than from an elevated position. "Commander Chen, I owe you an apology. We assumed that because your technology was primitive, your capabilities would be similarly limited. We failed to understand that the weapon itself is only one component of military effectiveness." Sarah lowered the rifle. "With respect, Ambassador, you weren't entirely wrong. My technology is primitive compared to what the network fields. I can't generate the firepower of a plasma repeater. I can't process tactical data as fast as your species, but I can adapt, improvise, and find solutions that might not appear in any tactical database. A Korthax delegate's crystalline structure pulsed with rapid thought. You demonstrated something we had not considered. Modern warfare has become standardized across the network. We all use similar weapons, similar tactics, similar defensive philosophies. An enemy who studies us can predict our responses. But humanity operates outside that paradigm. You use obsolete weapons in ways we don't anticipate. You create tactical solutions that our databases don't contain. In doing so, you present capabilities that are paradoxically more valuable than simple technological superiority. The Zenithar delegate who had designed the tests floated closer. Commander Chen, I believe I speak for many here when I say that humanity's application to join the Galactic Defense Network deserves serious reconsideration. You have demonstrated that your species brings something unique to collective security. Not raw power, but adaptability. Not technological superiority, but creative problem-solving. In an increasingly standardized military environment, those qualities have significant strategic value. Sarah felt a wave of relief, but she kept her expression professional. Does this mean humanity's application will be approved? It means, Threxcal said slowly, his mandibles moving in what Sarah had learned was their gesture of thoughtful consideration, that we have much to discuss. There are other trials, other requirements, but you have proven something important today. You have proven that humans deserve to be taken seriously. That alone is a significant achievement. The delegates began returning to their pods, already engaged in animated discussions. Sarah heard fragments of conversation as her translator struggled to keep up with multiple simultaneous exchanges. Did you see the way she used environmental factors as weapons? The gas cylinder explosion was impressive improvisation. We need to update our defensive protocols to account for kinetic projectiles. If humans can achieve these results with primitive weapons, imagine what they could do with proper equipment and training. As the observation gallery emptied, Sarah stood alone on the simulation deck, her great-grandfather's rifle across her shoulders. She thought about all the soldiers who had carried similar weapons through humanity's wars, never dreaming that one day their descendant would use such a rifle to prove humanity's worth to alien civilizations. The rifle had been mocked when she first arrived. An antique, they had called it. A museum piece, a symbol of humanity's primitive origins. But in the end, that simple mechanical weapon had accomplished what humanity's modern warships and energy weapons could not. It had earned respect. Sarah secured the rifle in her equipment bag and made her way back to her quarters. There would be more tests, more trials. But for now, she had given humanity a chance. She had shown the galaxy that humans were more than just another primitive species seeking admission to the galactic community. They were problem solvers. They were adapters. They were warriors who could take any tool, any situation, any disadvantage, and find a way to prevail. And sometimes, all it took was a rifle that everyone else had dismissed as obsolete. Sometimes the oldest weapon was exactly what you needed to prove the newest point. As she walked through the station's corridors, heading back to her ship, Sarah passed other species going about their business. Some recognized her from the observation gallery and nodded with newfound respect. Others simply moved aside, sensing that this human, who looked so small and fragile by galactic standards, was perhaps more dangerous than they had imagined. Sarah smiled to herself. Humanity had taken its first real step toward joining the Galactic Defense Network. Not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through simple human stubbornness and the willingness to use every tool available, no matter how primitive others might consider it. Her great-grandfather would have been proud. He had carried his rifle through battles on Earth, defending freedom against tyranny. Now, generations later, his weapon had defended humanity's future among the stars. Same rifle, different war, but the same fundamental truth remained. In the hands of a skilled warrior, any weapon could be deadly. And humanity had proven once and for all that they knew how to fight. The galaxy was about to learn what that really meant.